Now, why is that? It's the second finding, that there are natural matches. Certain types of funders, be they donors or government, support certain types of activities. And you can think about them, and it's logical, right? So the Susan G. Komen Foundation, phenomenally successful nonprofit, raises a tremendous amount of money from individuals for breast cancer research and for breast cancer patients. That's an issue that the vast majority of Americans can identify with. The number of steps that is away from some personal experience are tiny. So Susan G. Komen, for all of its skill and capability and success, didn't have to get Americans to care about that issue. They had to give them a way to act on that issue. In the nonprofit world, almost all organizations working with poor, disadvantaged kids, as they get larger, are government funded. There may be a board of some particularly dedicated individuals or foundations that give money, but as they grow, it's government money that they rely on, and there are very few exceptions to that. So there are patterns that can be discerned. And then the third finding, and then I'll move on to some implications, is that capacity building matters a great deal. As you try and support more and more sophisticated funding from government, larger and larger numbers of individual or corporate contributors, one person can't do it any longer. And that nonprofits have a very difficult time transitioning from what I would call a personal set of assets to an institutional set of assets. And again, these are things where patterns are discernible in terms of the type of staffing that's needed. And there are examples of organizations that have truly done things to scale. And it's no different than succeeding on the program side. What it takes in terms of ongoing training and rigor and quality and evaluation is what it takes with the second equation, the funding equation, to succeed. There's a great nonprofit that some of you may have heard of called the National Wild Turkey Federation. Now, does anyone here know that organization? All right, one gentleman, two people. So this is an organization that is at the intersection of hunting and the environment. It's a conservation organization, and it turns out, if you look at the data, a lot of these fastest growing environmental organizations live at this intersection. Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk, and essentially it's hunters that are preserving land so that they can kill animals. And, in the list of threats to the environment, killing the animals is much lower than suburban development or a whole list of other things. So it can work. But this organization has a natural base of support, and they did some fundraisers. And over time, they have grown to having 2,000 fundraisers in the United States per year. They do a turkey banquet. It's called a banquet in a box. They drop ship stuff from China to people in all of these communities and make it easy. And so they had an idea, they had a natural match, but the story of their success is the story of figuring out how to go from one special event to 2,000. And it is a business like any other business. So these are the lessons. There's an article that was, I think, emailed out or distributed in some way that talks about the more detailed look where we've really looked at the most common models of success in the nonprofit world for funding, what they match up to, what they don't. I'm happy afterwards to take questions on that. But I think the implications, while not shocking, are not representative of the norms of behavior. So for nonprofits themselves, what are some of the implications? The first is that inventiveness and creativity and vision alone doesn't cut it. That there is a realism that needs to be brought to the plans. That in fact, the internal ideas, the internal passion, while critical, are not what alone will govern success. That there are external forces at work with funding that govern success, and understanding the potential donors, their motivations, their limitations, and how your program needs to adapt, play in fundamentally. And there are key choices that need to be made here. It's not to say that you pursue the funding, but when an organization is thinking about how much effort to put into scaling their direct service activity versus advocacy, they have to think about how established and natural of a match of funding already exists. Because if one doesn't exist, then you need advocacy to help work and create it. If it does exist, you can scale. And a lot of organizations have wasted time without being clear about what was the greatest possibility for them. And at the heart of what the nonprofits need to do in accepting that realism is thinking about saying no, and that saying no to funders that are funding things that are off mission, that are funding things with inadequate overhead, but also saying no to your own internal desire to always put the last penny against direct service in that year, because the kinds of activities that maximize impact on beneficiaries at the moment are not the kinds of things that build the capacity or the understanding that it takes to know how to scale things. When it comes to funders, I think the hard lesson for funders is parallel, which is you can't do anything you want to do. By thinking about issues, there are issues about which you can internally know you are passionate, but where money can have the greatest impact is similarly affected by these other broader external financial forces. So one of the most common habits, if you will, of funders is that 90-95% of the time and of the expertise and specialization, if you will, is put around the issue, thinking about environmental change. And funders will fund things from the largest organizations to the newest ideas. And in fact, thinking about your theory of how you're going to have impact, and what you want to specialize in on the investment side is equally important. I mean, if you think about the parallel to the for-profit world, there are investors that deeply know certain fields of endeavor, whether it's resource extraction, retail, etc. There are also funders that deeply understand certain parts of the business chain, whether it's at the startup level, whether it's turnarounds at different levels, and philanthropy is no different. So the kinds of funder in philanthropy that can look at a great advocacy organization that's trying to demonstrate or prove something is a skill different from the skill to scaling an organization from 1 million to 5, different from scaling from 5 to 10. And identifying where your money will in fact achieve that result has less to do with the issue the organization is working on and more to do with the funding dynamics. And so for funders to think that not only do we have to limit ourselves to the passions that we have, but be realistic about the type of impact we expect our dollars to have and where it will occur. Because many funders desire great leverage and desire an eventual exit, and not all opportunities offer those equally. There are a handful of models for how you can be leveraged and how you can have exit that need to be analyzed. And then finally, I'll just conclude on the policymaker front. One of the great temptations of government is to believe that they are philanthropists and investors like much of the rest of the nonprofit sector, and to not recognize that, in fact, government is the dominant funder in the nonprofit sector, whether it's through direct funding or through guarantees of student loans or housing loans or other things. Government is the dominant funder in the sector. It's not, oftentimes we have this image in the United States that, unlike Europe, which has a government-funded social sector, we are charitably funded by people's own donations. And by and large, in most areas of endeavor, that's not true. And the government, therefore, has to think about itself as the ongoing revenue provider. And the lessons that it has there, despite some of the social innovation funds or other things that are quite attractive being launched now, the vast majority of government money is the ongoing underlying revenue. And how can the government, which is itself a distinct party from those it's helping, make the tightest connection possible? And there's some very interesting ways in which beneficiaries are entitled with vouchers, very interesting examples of places where government measures by result instead of output, but those are the things for government to focus on in its work. So I'll conclude there, and I hope to continue the discussion afterwards in the breakout session.